Hi everyone, good evening and welcome to the anniversary of Bring Back Eurotrains, also known as BBET. I am Bushra Akhtar, I am the chair of BBET. I work in technology and will be your co-chair tonight with Dickon Spain. So Dickon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Dickon Spain. I'm the political liaison officer for Bring Back Eurotrains. I'm also a borough councillor with Ashford Borough Council.
Okay, thank you, Dickon. So this is a recording meeting and we will make the recording available afterwards on our website, bringbackyourotrains.com. The session is 2 hours long and we ask the audience to put any questions in the chat so that we can collect them and answer them towards the end of the event. Please put your name of the speaker you're addressing the question to. So to give you a brief summary as to why we are here. So as you all know, since the pandemic struck in March 2020, Eurostar trains have not stopped in Ashford and Ebbsfleet. The petition was launched last year in March 2023 by us after many concerns were voiced in the community, and this event has been put together to give us a chance for residents to see what the landscape looks like for getting cross-channel trains reinstated in Kent and understand what has been done to date to help facilitate that. I am pleased to welcome a broad range of speakers, including Andrew Osborne, Head of Economic Development for Ashford, and Mark Welch for KCC Transport, Jean-Paul Cothias, Director of Mail Expertise Group, the Right Honourable Damian Green, an Ashford Borough Parliamentary Representative, Micheal Williams, Director for Better Transport, and a special interview with Edith and Micheal Robson, who led a campaign to reinstate Eurostar trains when services stopped back in 2008. So welcome everyone, and let's get started. Up first, we have Philip Gay, who's one of our BBET volunteers who has put together some stats from the petition to give some useful insights. Over to you, Philip.
Thanks, Bushra, and thanks everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, real. Hope you can see that. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing for the next 5 minutes is just going through the petition information. So just to give you a bit of a background, a bit of an overview. So we've had the petition launched last year, March, and up until yesterday, we've collected over 52,000 signatures. As we speak at the moment, those signatures are still increasing. So we're getting more and more people who've got interest of bringing back the services back to Ashford and Ebbsfleet. Now, what does that 52,000 signatures look like from a breakdown from a region level? So as we can see, the top regions, we've got South East and London. We've got people outside of the UK who have signed the petition, who wants that service reinstated. And we've got other parts of the UK. Now, 30,000 signatures are from the South East. Now, those are numbers, but what does it look like in percentage? So the same data on the right-hand side, same list, but in percentage format. And we can see that 75% of the petition comes from the South East and London, but a lot of the interest comes from other areas of the UK and even outside. So these numbers are very, very reassuring that there are people who have a passion for it to be reinstated for many reasons. Now, we can drill down into various regions and various percentages, but the main one I'm going to touch on from a high level is the Southeast region. So even though we talk about the Southeast, whereabouts in the Southeast? Is it Kent? Is it London? Is it what areas make up the Southeast? So what we can do, or what we have done, is those 30,000 signatures from the Southeast, we've broken that down into a heat map. So we can see the various hotspots. We can see Ashford, for example, as a main hotspot where people have signed the petition. We can even see Canterbury, Dover, other places of Kent. But with Kent to one side, we've also got people in London. We've also got people in East Sussex and Hastings, for example. So there's been a high number of people in different areas of the Southeast. And when we break that Southeast into areas, Kent, East Sussex, Essex, etc., we can see on the right-hand side the list I've just pulled up, the information broken down again into percentage just purely for the Southeast. So even though Kent is the predominant one, we've also got people in East Sussex, in Essex, who too have signed the petition, wanted the service reinstated as well. So that's looking at it from a Southeast region. But when we look at it even bigger, let's look at, say, Europe, for example. What does the numbers or what does the demographic look like in Europe? So when we look at the European map, even though the UK is heavily populated, we do have people who come from other European countries who also would want that service reinstated. You've got people in France and Belgium, as example. They are quite populated, but we have various other European countries as well. So that shows that there are people that use that service, and there are people who want to either see it reinstated or they are interested in it. So these numbers are very reassuring to show that it's not just UK, it's not just the Southeast, there are other people across the world. When we look down into the comments, we've got over 2,000 comments when people signed the petition. There was various comments that people have made their feelings quite clear about it. What we did is we've put it into categories. What are the main categories that people care about this particular petition and the reinstatement of the service of Ashford and Ebbsfleet? And there's various categories, but the main ones we picked up was like impact on families. There were people that moved to Kent for that service. The people who care about the environment. Now they're going via plane, etc. And also some people as well, they feel that it's not very convenient as well. So there's various reasons why people care, why people feel that the need is there for that service, why it was there in the first place, and the impact it's having on them at the moment without it being there. So that's why we've got comments as well, why people care, which helps us with a wider demographic. So in conclusion, the bits that I've been through of that of the breakdown of the numbers, it gives us 4 clear things, basically. It shows us it's just not Kent who have shown interest. There are people across the UK, in Europe and other parts of the world, even Australia as well, believe it or not. There are people who want to see the service reinstated for various reasons, there's various impacts. The loss of cross-channel connections is an important issue in Kent, as we've identified in the petition. And over 50,000 signatures, it pretty much speaks for itself. So as we speak at the moment, as I said before, those numbers are still increasing. So right now we've probably got 53,000 signatures, but at the moment it speaks for itself. Lots of people want to see it back. So that's the presentation of the petition information, and I'll hand it back over to Bushra and Rt.Hon.
Thanks very much for that, Philip. That's really insightful, fascinating information. And one thing that does strike me is that even though we've not got much profile, I would say, in France and on the continent, we've still got quite a high rate of response from the continent as well. So thank you very much for that. That's fantastic. Before we move on, just wanted to say to people that if you do want to ask questions in the Q&A section, which will be later in this event, If you can just drop your questions into the chat on Zoom, but do make sure that you say who you want to ask the question of, because we've got a number of people speaking. In fact, we've got two Micheals as well. So please give their full name so we know who your question is aimed to. So next up, we're going to look in much more detail at the business side of things, and we're very pleased to say that we've got Andrew Osborne with us. Andrew is the Head of Economic Development for Ashford Borough Council, and he's been a real driving force, a really great ally working alongside our campaign. And his dedication's evident really from what he's been doing recently, and he made a very impactful presentation to a parliamentary committee earlier this year, where he did bring up and it underscored the importance of international services like Eurostar. So we're very grateful to him for that. So Andrew's going to shed some light on the business survey that's being run primarily by Kent County Council, but with Ashford Borough Council as well, very much involved. And it's a tremendous survey. I think, well, Andrew will tell us more, but I think we've got sort of hundreds of businesses have fed into that. So very much looking forward to the insight that Andrew will give us on the growing demand for services to Ashford and Ebbsfleet, and particularly really around the impact on businesses and the economy. So Mark Welsh will also be available, who is a KCC transport person, so he'll be available as well. But Andrew's going to give us the main sort of insights on this. So won't keep you any longer. Hand over to Andrew. Thank you.
Apologies, I've loaded, hopefully people can see that, and shared a screen. I'm unashamedly using a presentation that Mark Welch used for the Joint Transport Board on the 5th of March. So thank you, Mark, in advance, and Mark's around hopefully to answer questions as well this evening. But just wanted to present firstly on the business survey work that Kent County Council has been doing, and then also just wanted to touch on sort of next steps for us as well. So hopefully you can see that reasonably well. What we effectively agreed with this group and with others is that we felt the business voice was important, the petition and the results of the petition, and what Philip has presented this evening is great, and I think we need to sort of capture some of that in the work that we move forward with. But this area was specific around the business survey. Kent County Council effectively ran a survey from October to January. I think it's important to say that it wasn't a sample survey, so we didn't go out to a whole series of businesses asking them whether Eurostar was important and the international services were important for them. It was for businesses to interact and to engage with. So those businesses that were engaged, we expect to be interested in the international services element. And so therefore you need to take the findings from this evening based on that. We work with Dartford Borough Council as well as Ashford Borough Council, Kent County Council together, the Chamber of Commerce, Visit Kent, and we have a group that meets regularly to look to try and support this activity and others. And we've looked to try and work with local authorities across Kent and even wider to share the petition, the business survey. But I think we know that we didn't reach everyone. I've spoken to a number of businesses that have subsequently come out and said, I didn't respond to the survey, but very supportive of the campaign and would like to do more. So we're conscious it's a good result. We had 686 responses in total. What we've done is, and Kent County Council has done, is a bit of screening on that. So we wanted to understand how many businesses that represents. Effectively represents 528 business responses. Multi-responses, obviously, therefore, for some of those businesses, and some of them very passionate, and I think that should have showed through what we got through. As probably we would expect, because we're all on this call and we want to see the services returned, 99% of all responses wanted to see the return of services. So I think that's a very strong message from the business community. There's a good number of them and a very strong message that we can then take forward on that. I think what Kent County Council wanted to do as well is to capture kind of the weight of that as well in relation to those business numbers. We know that's not all the businesses in Kent that potentially could respond. but they wanted to capture what that meant in terms of potential employment within the area. And within that, they've been able to calculate that that represents over 30,000 employees within Kent and the wider country. So that is a strong message, I think, to say that this the results of this survey, should be listened to, and clearly there's some weight behind it in terms of not only the number of businesses, but also the employment that they generate. So in terms of interactions with Europe and what makes up the responses, 477 responses detailed. They are either making sales within Europe, either have supply chains which they're interacting with in Europe, or have got visitors that are coming in all sorts of different forms. So there's a series of different interactions that businesses are having within that marketplace. Of the businesses, 94% said at least the service is quite important for their business. So clearly there is a good majority of those that see the weight of the service that was there before. And what we wanted to do as well is not just look at today, but potentially the opportunity moving forward in terms of marketplace. And it was encouraging to see that 63% of businesses are planning growth will mean further travel into Europe, which also then shows the potential for growth within the service within Kent. It's about impact as well. So there's a number of questions that were raised around impact, and I think this demonstrates very clearly the business view, and I hear from businesses all the time. It's a subject that comes up in every meeting I go to. I think I say that every time I speak, but it is. And I think this sort of reflects that. So 89% of respondents believe Eurostar service is not stopping, is having an impact on custom for their business. So that is quite a striking number in terms of the weight of those businesses that responded. 83% business surveyed indicate that they know of other businesses affected as well. So it's not just about those businesses that responded necessarily, but it's about the fact that there is a wider impact within the area. What we also wanted to do is have a look at those that are still using the service, because I think this is an important element. So certainly in conversations that we've had with Eurostar in the past, they've said, well, so what? You've got people will travel into London and will utilise the service, and we're seeing good patronage through St Pancras. So we wanted to understand that dynamic, and that although we've got 58% of respondents state current use of London St Pancras, which still means that they see rail is important, and international rail is important, and a good mode of transport. That does represent impact for those businesses. So questions were asked around what that entails. And I think this sort of reflects some of the stuff that Philip was talking about as well in terms of the resident petition. We know that travelling up to St Pancras, the impacts are more time that is expended by business employees and businesses themselves, more cost, not only in relation to extra train travel costs to get up to London, but we're also hearing evidence from businesses that means they can't do day trips anymore. So it's overnight costs, additional costs, partly maybe because they can't get up to London for an early enough train through the other services and other things. So additional costs within that. We know that there's elements around fewer Eurostar trips, fewer international trips overall, and there's an element of they're having to diversify where they go and do business around different international destinations. So I think that all in all starts to help provide a good positive picture around the impact, the importance for businesses of the international services in Kent, but also the impact that the current dearth of services is actually having within the economy and the wider area. So we need to sort of change this dynamic, and it's about sort of getting that weight of business view behind the campaign that we're looking to deliver. There's obviously a high visibility of the issue within the businesses surveyed. So they're an engaged audience, as we sort of spoke about at the beginning. So 99% of them businesses had been aware of the lack of international rail services prior to doing the survey work. 99% of them also share the concern, I think, of probably everyone in this meeting, concern of lack of any future services or commitment to services that there are. The other aspect was around, services when they return and the critical elements for businesses around services when they return. So questions around the service that there is or has been previously in Kent. The businesses were happy with the stations and the infrastructure that there was. The issue was really around service frequency, timings, which were cited as the key sort of issues. And I think this is something that has come up with Eurostar in the past around diminishing services in Kent, times, and other aspects. So it's not just about getting services back, but I think it's about getting frequency and the timings are right to ensure businesses can go and do day trips to Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, or wherever it may be able to do their business and then return. So I think there's a conclusion part that Mark's put in there around, we know that 24 years of sustained service and investment in Kent is already there. We're ready to go. We understand, I think, the position around the entry and exit system and the requirement about border issues, which we've raised as a concern in terms of additional infrastructure. But beyond that, we've got infrastructure that is ready to go and ready to be used. So what next? And Mark and I sit, as I said, within this group where we've got a number of organisations within Kent that are engaged and looking to support the campaign. Mark and his team at KCC are doing further analysis work on the business survey, so there'll be a bit more in-depth report that will be able to be shared more widely later on once that's delivered, and we hope that's relatively soon. And hopefully we'll provide a little bit of extra elements around geographic location as well, which Philip has already provided for the petition. We're using that, and we're developing up cases both for government and also for the operators, Eurostar or potentially any other operators interested in international services. So we're working on those cases at the moment. The timeline is to try and coincide with the delivery of those and the campaign back to Parliament and back to government and Eurostar around the 30th anniversary, which is May, of the start of the services through the Eurotunnel and through to the continent. So we feel that is a landmark event, and we're working towards trying to make a lot of noise around that period of time. So we're very positive and we're very grateful to the businesses that have engaged so far. We're looking still to engage with businesses and seek business champions for the area. So if there's anyone on this call who would like to then become part of that, we would seek quotes from them and to get involved, both from press perspective, but also in relation to the activities and campaign, to be able to then provide those quotes as good evidence as part of building those cases. So that's probably where we've got to at this stage. I think hopefully we've made some good progress in the last 6 months. Safe to say as well, we've been in touch with Bushra and the team as part of this. We've been seeking to support the petition as much as we can, and actively doing that through our channels, certainly over the last 3 or 4 months, and hopefully that's helped. Some days I look at it and it's gone up by 1,000, and other days it's gone up by 100, and I'm trying to work out quite how that all works, but the numbers are successfully going up, so we'll continue to do that as well. I will stop there and
thanks very much, Andrew. Some really interesting insights there, especially about how businesses were using it and timings of services. Our next speaker, there's a good sort of segue from that very interesting analysis of business side of things. We've got Jean-Claude Cothias, who is the CEO of Mail Expertise Group, Now, JC, he's been in Ashford for 25 years, and he's built up a business which employs a number of French nationals, and he's obviously very committed to the location, to setting up a fantastic business. So it'd be very interesting to hear his experience. Obviously, there's a knockback, a major knockback when Eurostar stopped services in 2020. So it'd be very interesting to hear what he's got to say. Just as a side note, JC, I found when I was researching that I've seen a reference to a New York Times article which seems to mention you in relation to Ashford. So I'd be fascinated what that was about. But obviously that's some time ago, I think. But anyway, I'll pass over to you, JC.
Right, thank you very much, Deacon. Yes, well, I've found myself in a situation of being interviewed by a lot of newspaper and magazine and TV across the years, because I was in an association led by Olivier Cadic, and I'm going to explain that actually in my short story. So I'm going to get to that in a minute. Actually, you invited me, and thank you very much for that. You invited me to talk about my experience as an entrepreneur and as a French national living in Ashford, and and the impact it has. So the small discussion here is in 3 parts. I will explain who I am and what I've been doing here for the past 25 years. What is the impact on my business? Regarding the Eurostar not stopping in Ashford, and what in the third part, what I believe we can do, and what I would do, in the business perspective. I mean, if it was a business problem, that I had to face for my company, for example. So if you're okay, I'm going to explain that. So as you said, I'm a French national, so that explained the weird accent and probably the wrong use of some syntax errors pretty much all over, and etc. So I'm apologize in advance for my poor English, but I'll do my best. So I've got 3 kids. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm currently the CEO of a company called Mail Expertise. We develop digital marketing automation platforms. So it's a little bit technical, but it's basically technology, web technology into digital marketing. And we work with companies like Renault, Hugo Boss, Pandora, Tesco, Michael Kors, B&Q, Currys, to name a few. We generate a revenue of approximately 4 million, and we employ around 20 people. It should be more, but since COVID and Brexit, it has become a real challenge, and I guess for all businesses, not only for us, to recruit personnel. So if you're looking for a job, just please apply, because we do look for people to hire some people. I've been an Ashfordian for the best part of the last 25 years. And I think I'm a good example of the Eurostar generation. I was initially a consultant in marketing living in Paris. I was working with companies such as Microsoft, Orange, etc. But I was not happy. I wanted to create my business. I've always wanted to create my business. And despite my energy, ambition, and hard work, amongst the main problems I had was that I had a fairly modest upbringing, meaning I had no capital, I had no experience, I had no knowledge, I had no connections. And I was in France at the time in a very unfavorable environment, where you needed approximately about 50,000 francs at the time. So that's 25 years ago. So that's a fairly consequent sum of money to incorporate a company. So you had no possibility to create a business with a £1 limited private limited company. You could not be a sole trader. So it was very, very unfavorable. And I've never heard of Ashford until I heard about a French entrepreneur, Olivier Cadic, who had relocated his business and family to Ashford, and was inviting other French entrepreneurs who were facing difficulties in France, either to set up a business or to develop their business, to do the same. So what did? I took a Eurostar, landed in Ashford, and found out what I've been looking for a long time, which is what I believe was the perfect environment to start up a business. So I came back to Paris. I left my job. I left my apartment in Paris, and I moved to Ashford, and I set up my first business. The first business I set up was in consultancy, specialized in international operation and cross-cultural management. But that's not really relevant to that. But I started on my own. At the time, I benefited from a loan from the HSBC and from the PYBT, the Prince's Youth Business Trust, which was an organization that was supporting young entrepreneurs who needed some financial help to set up their business. And because of that, I could start my journey as an entrepreneur. 25 years later, I've created, developed, and sold several companies with tens of millions of revenue, paid millions in taxes, generated hundreds of jobs, directly or indirectly. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud, and I'm also very, very grateful because of this, circumstance and this environment that I benefited from. And as a principal, you don't want to forget who helped you in the first place when you needed it. So I made the pledge to defend the interests of this country and Ashford in particular. And this is why I'm here today. So that's a little bit of my story. So Eurostar has always been a very, very important role in Ashford attractiveness. And I mean, Philip and Andrew has, shown some very interesting documents that demonstrate that. But in reality, if you've lived in Ashford, in the past 10, 20 years, the impact that the Eurostar had on the attractiveness on the on Ashford as a whole and generally and the whole region. So it's incredibly important for businesses and for its investment. And I mean, this is a fact. This is undeniable. I mean, nobody can dispute that. My companies, because I've set up different companies in different sectors, but always have a very strong connection with the continent, whether with my clients or with partners or with staff. And my activities have always required excellent connection to the continent. It has become a really important part of how we operate the business. And I've realized that most of my business opportunity come from actually meeting people, meeting clients, meeting investors, participating to events, and representing the company. And being able to go to Paris, Lille, or Brussels in less than 2 hours was absolutely vital for my business, and it's still absolutely vital for my business. So we haven't completely lost this ability, but because of the difficulties now that we're facing with increasing time travel, with increasing costs, with et cetera, it has made things much more difficult. As I think it was Philip who mentioned that, or Andrew, but sorry. But I used to go to Paris or Lille or Brussels, leaving in the morning and coming back in the evening, and being able to pack 20 meetings back to back. And that was very easy to do. And it was an incredible asset and a source of production of value for my business. Also, the possibility to travel on last minute, like being able to take a ticket for the next day and not necessarily have to plan things too much in advance, and to adapt to the necessity to meet a client, for example, for an urgent situation or whatever. That has been absolutely essential, and that I've personally lost that ability completely now with the current situation. It's because there is still less traffic, and I mean, all Eurostar are pretty much full all the time. And if you don't book in advance, I mean, it's impossible to go in the next day. So it's really, really complicated. And basically, you can't do that today. You need to book a hotel. You need to stay 2 to 3 days to being able to do what you used to do in 1 day before. And it has a massive impact. Again, in terms of cost, it has also an impact it's more an inconvenience that a real problem for us businesses. It is a problem. It's not a massive problem. But the problem is that I can't afford to be 2 or 3 days away from my business. I wouldn't say every week, but every other week. It's too complicated. Before I could do this job in 1 day. I can't do it now, and it is a real problem. So the consequences I had and my staff had to cut back drastically on the number of trips that we were doing to Paris and Brussels. I estimate that we probably had the loss over the last couple of years, over the last 2 years, 2 years and a half, we probably had a loss of up to 1 million in revenue. Oh, wow. In missed opportunities because of that. And about 1 million as well in investment opportunities as well. All of that should have generated jobs. It should have generated revenue, profit, taxes. All of that has not happened. And of course, staff opportunities. The other thing we had to do as well is we had to, for the first time in 25 years, and it really pains me to actually say that, but for the first time in 25 years, we had to resort to to hire staff outside the UK to sort of compensate for our inability to be present, in France, Belgium, or wherever on the continent when needed. And this is again lack of employment here for the Ashfordians. It's a massive problem. So
JC,
that's
JC,
yes.
Sorry. Can I just wind you up in about a sort of minute? So if you can
of
sort of bring things to a conclusion in about a minute. It's fantastic stuff. So absolutely great.
Really
so if we can ask, really great.
Okay. I'll finish in a couple of sentences. I mean, it is undeniable. I mean, the importance of the Eurostar is absolutely undeniable, and I mean, no one can dispute that. Neither Eurostar, I don't think they really care. I'll be completely honest. I don't think they really care about that. If I had to deal with that on a business perspective, I would say that the only way to actually get to a result is to force them to respect the deal. I mean, they have a deal, which is the exploitation of this line between Paris and London with stops in Ashford, etc. And there's a contractual arrangement in place. They cannot decide on their own to stop this this contract. So either they should face financial penalties, financial sanctions, if they do not want to reopen it, or we should open this line to competition. We know there are companies from Spain and from other countries that are lining up to actually take this line, and that discussion should be opened, because if Eurostar do not want to have this line open, some other company will. But I think I think it's a political decision. I think it comes essentially from the government, who need to force the discussion and need to impose its will. It's not only an economical factor, it's also a political factor. And I think the government should be acting more strongly about this. And that's it. So I'm wrapping it up. Sorry.
Thank you very much, JC. No, really appreciate your contribution is absolutely brilliant, because we're seeing the inside of an entrepreneur running a business in Ashford and committed, obviously French nationals, 25 years. Brilliant, very, very useful information. So, and I think actually there's a very strong link into our next speaker, yes. Obviously, Damian Green, Honourable Damian Green MP, because obviously JC's obviously laid down some challenges and some issues that we've got with Eurostar's service. But obviously Damian will be able to speak into that. So we're really pleased to have Damian Green MP with us. Damian, unless you've been hiding under a rock for the last few years, Damian's been our MP since 1997. And we recognise very much that Damian's been a strong advocate for international rail services in Ashford for some years. So, and also, if people have been paying attention, Damian also secured a debate on international rail services from Kent last year, which I'm sure he'll tell us more about. So we look forward to hearing what he's done, what he's doing now to help restore international services in Kent. Just before I hand over to Damian, just to remind you, well, just to say that Damian's got to go before the end of the event, so we will be having a brief Q&A immediately after he speaks. And also, please do keep in questions coming in for other speakers, but make sure you address those to the particular speakers. But anyway, over to you, Damian. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks very much, Rt.Hon. And I'm glad to see so many people on the call. Glad that there's a sort of genuine community behind this push. We will all violently agree with each other on what we're trying to achieve. So I won't go into that, but I'll take very much the point that JC made at the end of his presentation about the interaction between commercial decisions and political decisions. So I'll talk about the national political push that I'm trying to get forward and hope that the government will get on board with. As Rt.Hon has said, I held a debate on this very issue in Parliament towards the end of last year, which was replied to in a reasonably positive way by the Rail Minister, Hugh Merriman, who happily for us is a reasonably local MP, being just over the border in East Sussex. So he absolutely gets the point about services from Ashford. And he, in the debate, said all the right things, but I obviously don't want to leave it there. I think it's important that we keep the pressure up. So I wrote to him afterwards with a series of specific requests, and I'll do a subbed down version of what he said to me, 2 or 3 points in it. He said that he'd met Eurostar CEO Gwendolyn Kaznev in November, where the topic of Kent stations was on the agenda. He emphasised the importance of the company continuing to engage constructively with Kent stakeholders. And I asked him as well about the potential competitors that people have talked about, including Evelyn, which has publicised its intentions to launch services in competition with Eurostar. And he welcomes the prospect for competition and the benefits this will bring, not least increasing the prospects of restoring services to Kent, and ends with a formal but warm line about grateful for my continued campaigning on the matter, which he knows is appreciated by stakeholders across Kent, and more importantly, looks forward to continuing to work with you to achieve the goal of seeing the return of international services in Kent, which is quite a decent commitment. But again, in recent weeks, I have put down some parliamentary questions to try and make sure that the subject stays high on the agenda inside the Department for Transport. And the last answer I had, which was to a question I tabled last week, said that he had most recently met with Eurostar since his letter to me, and he's emphasised the UK government's desire to see the return of international services at Ebbsfleet and Ashford as soon as reasonably possible, and says his officials have and will continue to engage regularly with Eurostar on this matter and press for the reinstatement of services at Kent stations once it's commercially viable for them to do so. So in time-honoured fashion, that leaves the government facing in the right direction, but also with the get out of Eurostar deciding its commercial viability. And that, I think, is the crux of the matter, and why I want to keep pushing on this through Parliament, because clearly the government wants our station back as much as we do, but in the end, they're going to leave it to Eurostar to take a commercial decision. And I think there are various levers that we can push on this. The main one of which is the amount of taxpayers' money that's gone into building the stations in the first place. And most specifically for Ashford, the fact that they spent 8 million on the new signalling, the Ashford Spurs project, which allowed the new generation of Eurostar trains to come into Ashford, a project that, with terrible irony, was completed in March 2020, just as international services were stopped because of COVID. But it's still there, it still worked, and it's still, at the moment, it's taxpayers' money completely down the drain. And I would hope that the British government would not want that to remain the case. I think on the time scale, we haven't discussed that yet. I think it's worth thinking about of when we can realistically expect these services to come back, because it's pretty clear that Eurostar's commercial viability has improved again. As it happened, I took a Eurostar from St Pancras a couple of weeks ago and was struck by how full both the train and the waiting rooms were. It's clearly, as we know, a popular service that people want to use. I think, frankly, being realistic about it, we know that the new EU immigration system, the EES system, is coming in October this year, and nobody will want to do anything to put that at risk. So, as I say, being realistic, I don't think any decision is going to be made until after that system has been introduced and settled down, because you may well have seen that even just with St Pancras, HS1 is putting out some fairly hairy predictions that unless they get more gates open and more space and more customs officers and immigration officers rather in the entrance hall, then there will be queues halfway around the Euston Road and most of North London if they try and run all their trains. So they will want to see that that's all been resolved before they bring back the full scale operation using all the other stations, including Ashford. So, I mean, that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep pushing, obviously, through the course of this year. But I do think, therefore, that one of the constructive things that we can all do over the next few months is make contact with potential competitors, because I think that will be clearly a cloud on Eurostar's horizon, that the prospect of competition will normally sharpens anyone's mind quite a lot. And clearly, one of the comparative advantages, either for Eurostar or a competitor, will be to able to offer a full range of services where attracting customers to where they want to leave from, which in this case, showing that survey, there are thousands of people who would prefer to leave from Ashford. And in the end, we're going to have to convince Eurostar that there are enough of them that they will run a profitable service from there. They are in a position where if they wanted to, they could resist political pressure. I think they won't want to. And I think one of the things that makes me more optimistic now than I was in the early to post-COVID months, as it were, is that relations between the UK government and the French government are much better than they were in 2021. And to put it very, very simplistically, but not inaccurately, Rishi gets on with Macron a lot better than Boris did. And the French governmental system is extremely centralized. And if the president is looking benignly on something, then you're much more likely to get all arms of the French state acting in a positive way. And we've seen some practical advantages of that at Dover, as it happens, in one of the holiday periods where suddenly there were far more booths open than there had been previously. And so I think that's a lever we can use to say that this is something that the British government would very much want. If we can show that it's commercially advantageous to a French state-owned rail operator, then it will be a no-brainer to reopen the stations. So, as I say, I think we should use the lever of potential competition, obviously both with the competitors themselves, but also with Eurostar, and have a realistic target of bringing the services back as soon as we can after the EES system settles down in October this year. I'll stop there so I can give some time for questions.
Thank you very much, Damian. That's really useful. In fact, you've covered off a number of the questions that I would have asked. But One of the questions that I have got is in terms of level playing field for competitors, because obviously that's important to attract the competitors in. Obviously, we've got things like the photometric booths at St Pancras, which I know that Eurostar were talking about. And at one point, I think they were sort of talking about capping passenger numbers or something if they didn't get a certain number of photometric booths. So my question really is around, are you happy at the moment that we have things in place to allow competitors to come in as easily as possible? I mean, a question around sort of whether there's proprietary technology that or systems that Eurostar own that would then make it more difficult for competitors to come in and put in place customs processing, etc. And in terms of a second part to that question really is in terms of access charges, because obviously we have HS1 and we have GetLink, you know, who I think are excellent companies, but obviously they are in a position to charge, you know, in accordance with their requirements. So that sort of question of level playing field side of things, really.
Yeah, I think the two questions run together because you know, logically, both HS1 and GetLink should want as many operators as possible using their infrastructure. You know, make your assets sweat is a pretty basic business decision. And at the moment, there are lots of train paths not used on HS1 and through the tunnel. So they should both want to act as facilitators of competition coming in. And I know HS1 better than I know GetLink for obvious reasons, but HS1 I think are very keen, and I think I'm right in saying have been cooperating with the work done on the business study as a sort of gesture of goodwill that they would like to help the Kent stations come back. In terms of proprietary technology, as far as I'm aware, but there will be others who are greater experts on rail technology than me on this call, that the as it were, the infrastructure that allows trains to run will not be Eurostar's, will belong to other people. So, I mean, clearly all the technical standards would need to be met by any competitor, and safety is always a huge thing on the railways and can often cause quite long delays before anything new happens. But I don't think there would be any insurmountable barriers there. I mean, there will be practical points to make about if you've got people running competing timetables, is the current setup at St Pancras big enough? Even before you add demands for PAF officers, immigration officers from the French authorities at Ashford, and I suspect the answer at St Pancras would be no. So they would need to do some quite radical work there, and in practical terms, close a few of the shops and make them part of the entrance hall. But we could certainly obviously cope with anything like that at Ashford. So that should act as an attraction to people, if anything.
Thank you for that answer. I mean, obviously, as capacity comes under more pressure at St Pancras, obviously the argument for using completely unused capacity at Ashford and Ebbsfleet is becoming stronger, of course. I think Bushra's got a question from one of our audience.
That's right. So this is a common question we get asked by a lot of our supporters. So if the government is truly wanting the services back, why did it not support Eurostar during the pandemic and allow shares in Eurostar to be sold?
I mean, I know Eurostar always says they got no support from the British government during the pandemic. I'm sitting in the House of Commons, so I'll use the House of Commons terms, slightly disingenuous in that they did, of course, get all the furlough money for their UK operatives that others were getting. So they did get millions of pounds of British taxpayers' money. And I know, because I've had this argument with them, they've always argued that they should have had the same level of subsidy as other transport operators. There is the slight problem that they are, whatever is 50% plus, owned by SNCF. So in the end, they are an arm of the French state. And I think if the British government had given British taxpayers money to the French government during COVID, there would have been not unreasonable objections to that. That was at a time when we as a country were spending literally hundreds of billions of pounds supporting our own people to basically get them through when their work had been compulsorily taken away from them. If we were spending millions on top of that, just handing it over to the French government, I think, as I say, there would have been objections to that, and I don't think those objections would have been unreasonable.
Thank you.
Sure. So a question about Eurostar and their strategy. Obviously, they've merged with Thalys, so they have, and we've seen that their strategy is definitely city to city focused. Obviously, that's the most attractive part of their business. There was a statement from Gwendolyn Cazenave last year, I think July, in Financial Times, saying that they would be focusing on their city to city routes, but also saying that they wouldn't be considering either Ashford or Ebbsfleet, restoring services at Ashford or Ebbsfleet, until they cleared their debts. And there were some other conditions, but the debts are obviously a significant factor for them, or they're stating that they are a significant factor. I think end of 2022, they had something like over 900 million pounds worth of debts. Obviously, as you say, they're doing quite well, so they're clearing debts down. I think I saw a figure for 100 to 125 million a year or something like that. But even given that, it could take sort of 6 or 7 years for them to completely clear the debts. So with that sort of stated position, their obvious prioritization of city to city, what's your sort of approach going forward in terms of it would seem to me that, and probably other people, that obviously the focus should be on competitors, encouraging, enabling. So what sort of levers can we pull in terms of helping ourselves to get Ashford and Ebbsfleet services back with competitors?
I mean, the theology of French railways has always been that high-speed rail should be big city to big city. They always thought it was a peculiar English eccentricity that we wanted to stop high-speed trains and make them a bit slower to stop them in other communities. And that still is writ large in their thinking. So how can we persuade them to accept again the English eccentricity as they see it? I mean, I think there are two. One is deep encouragement from the British government that this would help all round and would smooth other things. And as I say, we've got lip service is too unfair. We have got public commitments to that from the British government, but they've not started putting the arm on yet. And I think, as I say, after October, that may be the time to start doing that. But the other one is the commercial point. And you make the point that last summer she was saying that they were going to have to pay the debts off completely, and actually the sort of public statements have got a bit softer since then, and a bit more encouraging for us. So I think the other lever we can pull is the demonstration of commercial viability. That actually, if they can make money from Ashford and Ebbsfleet, then that enables them to pay their debts down faster. So we're not asking them to provide a subsidized social service. We're actually saying this is in your commercial interest. And in a sense, it's a message that they never want to hear, because they would much rather run, London, Paris, and so on. But nevertheless, if we can plausibly demonstrate that this is a way they can become financially more healthy, then any sensible company would do that.
Absolutely, yeah. So final sort of question, in terms of what are the sort of major obstacles at the moment that you see to getting services back at Ashford and Ebbsfleet? If you had to pick out sort of 2 or 3 of the biggest obstacles that we've got at the moment, all of us, to getting services back, what would those sort of 2 or 3 obstacles be, and what do you think would be a reasonable approach to removing those blocks?
I mean, the most immediate obstacle is the uncertainty over how immigration into the EU will cope with the new EES system. And in a sense, there's not a lot we can do about that. But with other parts of my brain, as it were, I'm part of a group of Kent MPs who are lobbying very hard to make sure that Dover doesn't seize up completely in October, not least for the interest of everyone trying to travel on motorways in Kent, which is another transport issue that occupies a large part of my thinking and time. So that I think is hugely important, that we actually have a smooth system of movement between England and France and back again. That's one obstacle, but we can't do much about that. The other obstacle is the making clear, not least to the British government, how important the Kent stations are to wider economic growth in throughout the second most profitable region of the British economy, which is the southeast. That actually this isn't just a problem for communities in Ashford and around Ebbsfleet. It actually really affects business in particular, and therefore growth across a larger area of the southeast. I think that's quite an important task we can set ourselves to try and demonstrate. And the third one, I would say, is just diplomacy, to the extent of keeping it high high enough on the agenda of transport ministers that they, in the end, they get fed up of being nagged about it. That's why I didn't just hold the debate and forget it. I've gone back, and I've gone back again, and I will go back again, so that the transport ministers who are telling me all the right words actually turn those words into action. I think that's a sort of key task for the rest of this year. And it's obviously I can act as a point person for that. But the more convincing evidence we've got from different parts, from local authorities, from businesses, from individual people who know about railways, all the people who are speaking tonight, the more we can speak with one voice, the more likely we are to achieve a successful effect.
Well, thank you very much, Damian, for your participation this evening. Really appreciate that, and thank you for taking time to answer the questions. I understand that you've got to leave and go to another engagement now, but thank you very much for that. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So our next speaker is Micheal Solomon Williams, who is the campaign manager for campaigns manager for Better Transport. So we're very pleased that Micheal could join us this evening. And we look forward to a very interesting talk for him. Micheal is a strong advocate for sustainable business travel, and definitely understands the importance of sustainable transport on the environment. And I'm sure that he'll be also discussing the impact of transport inequality and the lack of connections more broadly, and their impacts of those. So without further ado, let's hear from Micheal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deacon. Thank you, Bush. And look, thank you to everyone for the presentations thus far. It's been hugely inspiring. Damian may have left now, but the previous presentations have all been really brilliant. So thank you to you all. And I should say, as an organisation, we operate to an extent quite centrally in terms of government lobbying. I'll introduce us in a second, but it's massively inspiring to see such a huge grassroots campaign effectively, and the impact that it has. So yeah, really thus far inspired and pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me along. I'm just going to share my screen and do a short presentation that's not super long. It'll cover some things we've talked about already tonight, and perhaps some new things as well, but join the dots. And echoing what Damian was just saying, will really, in summary, be about seeing what we can do together and seeing how we as an organisation can help. Yep, so I'm campaigns manager at Campaign for Better Transport. We are the leading national charity for sustainable transport and the only one covering all modes. We've been around for over 50 years, founded in 1973 as Transport 2000. So those of you who've been in transport world for a long time may recognise that name as well. We changed our name for obvious reasons after the turn of the millennium to Campaign for Better Transport. We have been, as I say, a leading authoritative voice on policy development and public campaigning for 50 years. So we sit between government, national government, local government, the transport industry and the public. And really, we have a very high impact for what effectively is a small organisation in terms of numbers of people. Our vision is for all communities to have access to high quality, sustainable transport that meets their needs, improves quality of life and protects the environment. Of course, we make the case for better, greener, fairer transport and those benefits that it brings to the environment, to well-being and social equity, health and to business, which we've talked about importantly today. Just a quick overview of recent campaign successes, an example of some of the things that we can do. So we lobbied successfully last year for a £2 national bus fare cap. And as many of you will know, that's been implemented 3 times successfully. So that was a big success. Another one slightly longer term, and that really pertains to what we're talking about here, is actually on railway station and line reopenings. So we have fed into the Restoring Your Railway Fund, which is a government fund, which has been very impactful in reopening many of the branch lines that were closed in the 60s. And in fact, we were founded when we started in 1973. It was to a large extent in response to those branch line closures and proposals to close a lot more branch lines. And that's a really huge part of our work. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Also, rail fares and ticketing reform. We make the case for simplification and fairer rail fares and ticketing. We've done a big piece of work on that recently, and we're working closely with the government. We're chairing a working group with DfT, with the GBR transition team, that's Great British Railways transition team, Trainline, all the major stakeholders in the rail sector to work on improving the fares and ticketing offer to passengers. Because as you will undoubtedly know and have felt, the cost of travelling by train has gone up at twice the cost of driving, and that's no use to anyone, and there are many other details within that. A big one as well last year was saving the day travel card, and thank you to Kent County Council for your involvement in that. In fact, you were a big stakeholder in that. And this was, of course, not a London-centric thing whatsoever, but for people who travel in and out of London. And as you'll know, the discount that you will receive from the travel card agreement is significant. When you add that onto your ticket in and out of London, you get your travel card at a discount price. That was going to be cut in January. We saw that risk and we decided to intervene, and we brought together the Department for Transport, Rail Delivery Group and Transport for London, and managed to negotiate for that travel card to be saved for 14 million people who use it every year. That includes disabled passengers and school groups and young people and elderly passengers as well who would have lost that. So that was a big win last year. Example of some of our research. So there's the Fair Future Report, Fares and Ticketing, a business paper we did last year as well, Pay As You Drive paper, Transport Deserts, which is on transport inequality and social exclusion, the future of rail and expanding the railways. The last one on that list is really about the reopening railways, as I mentioned earlier. That's just a cross section. There are many, many more papers where that comes from. Research is a big part of what we do. So on reopening rail, our 27 report, Expanding the Railways, How to Deliver and Develop a Proposal to reopen your railways, was a big collaboration between ourselves, Department for Transport and Rail Future. And there was a follow-up 2 years later, which called for a national programme of rail reopenings, identifying disused lines that should be first priority. Using a new methodology, we rated lines for their viability and the economic and environmental benefits they bring if reopened. This has been successful. Again, for those of you who follow transport around the country, you may know that a couple of years ago, the Dartmoor line was reopened, Oakhampton Station. There are many more stations being reopened. And next year, I'll just show a slide, the Northumberland line will be reopened in Ashington and Blythe, which is going to be very exciting. There's a bit of a quote from the opening. That's Peter Wilkinson, Managing Director of Passenger Services at the Department for Transport, from that paper. So here's just a map of the Northumberland line. This is an old freight line, which is being reopened for passenger use after having been closed for over 40 years. So I just wanted to put that out there as an example of the fact that we can get stuff done, and we'd like to get stuff done for you. So quick summary of the challenges as we see them. Of course, Department for Transport are a challenge. And it happens that yesterday, myself and my colleague went into the Department for Transport and had a meeting with Andrea Pearson, who is Head of International in the department, and her colleague, and had a very useful meeting. We covered some of the issues that we've talked about today and that Damian was just talking about. Of course, the European entry and exit system is going to be a huge challenge over the next 18 months. It's a concerning time for all. HS1, we also meet frequently with HS1 and GetLink, and they, of course, HS1, their priority is to get more entrants onto the line, but they are aware that the EEES will be a huge challenge. So Department for Transport, really, we talked about Ashford and Ebbsfleet with them yesterday, head of international, and, you know, their line at the moment is it doesn't seem viable. And they state, of course, as we've discussed, that they have limited number of border staff and they can't justify putting some down at Ashford and Ebbsfleet at this point. Eurostar also are a challenge and obstacle as discussed in terms of making the business case and their debt recovery, which we're seeing reflected in much higher fares than previously. Then there's the European entry and exit system, and of course, longer term political will. Do we really want this? Do the decision makers really want to see this happen? That's where we hope to come in handy. Opportunities, of course, and as mentioned, the tunnel capacity is really not being maximised whatsoever. If anything, in fact, in discussions yesterday with the Director of International, it's at about 50%. That's quite extraordinary. Now, of course, that's overall, that's not within some of the concentrated periods when people travel, but there is potentially 50% more in terms of train paths that could be used. So there's potential here. While it's a very tricky period right now, if we're thinking medium to long term, it's potentially a very exciting period if that capacity can really be used. Then another opportunity, of course, is the new entrants. We've talked about Evolyn and Huero. There's also Renfe and potentially another couple of new entrants who are interested in getting involved. So they're really very significant, I think, in terms of engaging them, persuading them of the business case. The issue is, and again, this is something we found out yesterday or had confirmed yesterday in our meeting with Andrea, was that some of them are not as developed as previous potential entrants have been. Some of them, I think Huero, for example, barely have a website. They're in very early stages. Evolyn maybe further on. Renfe, of course, are a Spanish operator, so they're already set up in many respects. So there's work to be done there, but it's a huge possibility. An opportunity, I should say there, that's that we can help. So Campaign for Better Transport, we can do research, we can do a briefing on the model that we've used for reopening rail or expanding the railways, and that can certainly help. And I'll talk about that a little more later on. And then finally here, Stratford International. And this is something that the department actually would like us to potentially do some work on. Stratford International is sitting there unused. The French authorities have set everything up in terms of border and infrastructure. It's ready to go. That's a bit of a kind of, a bit of a missed opportunity, but an existing opportunity. If we can make the case, particularly for these new entrants, to use Stratford, now this is where it gets interesting, then this could really be a successful way to get Ashford and Ebbsfleet reopened. The thing is, at the moment, we know that Eurostar are not keen on competition. They've got a default monopoly on GetLink in the tunnel, and they're not really keen on competition. However, if those competitors could really brand the thing themselves, Stratford International as their own line, people would start talking about, for example, I'm going to take the, I'll take the whatever it's called, I'll take the Renfe from Stratford, or I'll take the Huero from Stratford, I'll take the Eurostar from St Pancras. At that point, they might not even need to both go out of the same London station for a while. So there's real potential there to make the case for reopening Stratford, or indeed opening Stratford. Yes, on this front, in terms of the benefits of open access, it's just useful, I think, just to remind ourselves of how open access is succeeding on other lines in the UK, most notably on the East Coast Main Line, where LNER, Grand Central and Hull trains are the only operators with the passenger numbers back up to or surpassing pre-pandemic levels. And that's largely thanks to those open access operators, which is Lumo and Grand Central. Hull trains are on there, by the way, because Lumo are part of Hull trains. So the second bullet point there, the ECML, the East Coast Main Line open access impact on shifting journeys from air to rail, that's been huge. So there's been an over 50% shift of mode share, and this is, of course, hugely important to us as a sustainable transport organisation, from air to rail on that East Coast line, London to Edinburgh. It used to be a majority that would take the plane for those direct London to Edinburgh trips. It's really flipped thanks to that open access aspect. Grand Union, of course, are also offering a potential for a West Coast Main Line open access route up round to Stirling. We've some reservations about that because they're looking at diesel trains, but nevertheless, it's positive overall. So on the last point there, we need to talk more and more about international rail, about Euro trains and not the Eurostar, really this wider picture. Our offer, therefore, to the campaign is if we can be of assistance in research and lobbying, we'd like to. I should say it would be helpful to us to have the business funding partners as part of that, and I know that offer has always been already been asked for business support, and it would make sense from our point of view, from everyone's point of view, if there are businesses really making the case, for example, for Stratford, for example, for one of these new entrants, right? So if there are businesses in the area who really would like to be involved with us in making the case, we're not talking huge amounts, but it could be huge in terms of impact. That would be great to work with you on that. APPG engagement, we do engage in the rail APPG, that's the all-party parliamentary group often, and some of the other rail-related APPGs. I don't believe there's an international rail APPG. Somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, but if there's not and there's capacity to set one up, Damian's left now, but perhaps with his involvement, we'd be keen to look into that potentially if there's capacity to do that. It's the sort of thing that we can do. We did set one up recently for a transport deserts, as it were, excluded communities, APPG. So we can do that sort of thing, and that can be very helpful. Roundtables and events, again, we can chair those, we can set them up, we can run those, we can be part of those, and they can be very useful. We find it quite straightforward to get involvement from the ministers, the rail ministers we meet with frequently. Currently, Mark Harper and Hugh Merriman, we meet frequently with them and their special advisors. Likewise, the shadow team. At the moment, it's twice weekly with the shadow rail minister, Stephen Morgan, and would be very, very keen to be involved in roundtables.
Michael, we'll have to sort of bring you. It's absolutely brilliant, and thank you very much for what you've presented so far.
But do you round up? No worries. I think I'm there then. That's pretty much it. So yeah, this is the last slide. So yeah, just to say, we are developing an international rail program overall, and which is looking at passenger and freight and the Stratford element, and we'd love to incorporate Ashford and Ebbsfleet into that very much, and then the associated media that would go with that and all that we do. We do have great links with media, and things we talk about tend to get picked up. So that's our offer to you.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for joining us this evening. Very, very useful information, and we will definitely get around a table with you at some point very soon. Certainly, I mean, the station analysis would be absolutely fantastic. I understand the sort of dynamics behind the business and everything. So thank you very much for that.
Pleasure. Apologies, I have to leave at 7:30.
That's all right. I recognise. Thanks very much. We probably won't get the chance for asking questions of Michael, I think, probably because he's leaving at 7:30. But thank you very much for that.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, there's potential collaboration between, I guess, Andrew Osborne and Michael. So maybe we can connect you after the session.
I very much welcome that, Bushra. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
So don't forget to drop your questions into chat. We will definitely come to your questions. Don't worry about that. And also, please do add the name of the person that the question is going to. So without sort of belaboring this too much, because we're running a little bit behind time, apologies for that. But we'd like to welcome Edith and Micheal Robson. Edith and Micheal ran an amazing campaign, Save Our Eurostar, back between 2007 and 2009 to make sure we had direct services from or to Brussels. And they got more than 11,000 people to sign their petition. So fantastic work. So we're very excited to hear and learn from your experiences, Edith and Micheal. No pressure. Yeah, over to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, Micheal worked in Brussels and he obviously knows David Pugh. So they cottoned on to me when I retired and said, "You're going to lead a campaign to keep our services going." But it was very primitive by comparison to now, because of course I knew, yes, I used the internet for research for school, and I'm sure I've made thousands of worksheets for school, but I had nothing like this, like Zoom, Facebook, nada. So very primitive campaign. But I started off by putting out a flyer when I was waiting for Micheal to come home from Brussels on a Friday evening, and handing out leaflets to people saying, "Do you know they're going to close these stations in Kent?" And most people didn't know.
Yeah.
And it spread a bit from there. I can't remember how I got in touch with various people, but one of them was Olivier Cadic, who used to, I think, do day trips on a Monday, because Michael often saw him going out on a Monday morning on the early train to Brussels.
Yeah, and JC has referred to Olivier Cadic as well already,
Yes.
hasn't he? Yeah.
Well, he lived in Kent, and I think still does, and produces and translates, you know, the bande dessinée, the cartoon style books. So that his company is doing that. He's also written a book himself in this form, but he is now actually a senator in the French Parliament, and he is the senator who represents French people living out with France. But I think perhaps he might be someone who might have some inner knowledge from the inner sanctums of the government as to what their attitude would be, not just simply Eurostar's attitude. We both went to visit members of KCC and said, look, you know, can you help? And can you get lots of people that you know to write a letter, a combined letter to the newspaper to say this is happening and we don't believe it should be. But that's about as far as it went, I think, to contact business people. I did meet some others. One, I think, if I remember rightly, was someone who worked for Osborne, the vineyard near Appledore, and they were wanting to produce champagne type of wine, and therefore were traveling out to Lille and then to Champagne to speak to people there to give them advice, and wanted to bring them over. And of course that was completely messed up because this was a day trip gone. So there was great support from that. Because Michael's work gave him contacts within the Parliament in Brussels, I then got hold of all our MEPs and they were helpful. I think Caroline Lucas, for example, managed to get a vast number of signatures for me. I did say to our council in Ashford, because the leader of the council and the gentleman in charge, I can't always remember my words these days. Anyhow, they were supportive, and I said, well, you could pass a petition round your staff. So I think they did.
And of course, all of this political pressure was far more effective in those days, because at that stage, the UK government had a financial stake in Eurostar.
Well, Michael travelled back and forward. He came back one weekend and I went out the other because the 90-day rule applied. But our MEPs had to go back and forward as well. And there were quite a few of them. The other thing I did was I used to travel out in a lunchtime train to Brussels on a Friday. So I had a little slip of paper and teacherish pens, in case people didn't have one, to get people to fill them out. What do you think about this closing? And I actually had people from Ebbsfleet saying, well, we don't want Eurostars in Ebbsfleet rather than Ashford, because it's too busy up there and the roads already. I thought that was an interesting one. But I faithfully went round, and I did get a lot of people saying, well, we can't have this happening. We like going out in our train to Brussels at lunchtime and having the weekend there. It's a wonderful place. And I was shut down because obviously I inadvertently didn't know, gave one to someone who worked for Eurostar, one of the high Hegians, I think. And he said, you're not allowed to do this. This is our property.
Yeah. But anyway, it was successful, and I have memories of you actually delivering a big petition to 10 Downing Street, and yes, that highlights really the difference that we are now in, that different political landscape, because yes, because the ownership is just not there, is it?
Well, the MEPs were behind me or with me. I think Olivier Cadic was there, and one or two other gentlemen whose names I have forgotten. And the Prime Minister at the time was Gordon Brown, who was the year below me at school. So I quoted the school motto, "Quid Quanabor," where I wish I should strive to my utmost. But then our daughter, who had done work experience in the Cabinet Office came home and said, "Mummy, you know what happens to petitions, don't you? They all get stuck in the basement."
Well, it did have an effect, Edith. It's lovely hearing a little bit about your experiences, and it was effective, and it did result in that service from Ashford being retained and also expanded. That's the significant thing. We certainly do remember being able to use the expanded services going to the south of France. But part of the conversation with both of you, Edith and Micheal, you're a very interesting couple, because not only was Edith the leading campaign light in 2008, but Micheal, you've had years and years of experience within the rail industry. And I know various other speakers in today's call have alluded to the potential of new entrants into the marketplace. And in a previous conversation in the run-up, in the preparation for this webinar, I was very excited to hear you were quite upbeat about the prospect of new entrants into the market. And maybe you should also describe a little bit about your background in the, your rail experience, I should say, as well.
Well, I suppose the easiest thing to say is I worked 40 years for the railways, nationalised, privatised, and then went bankrupt with Failtrack. So anyway, lots of things on there. But in my past, I was the area manager at Ashford when Ashford International was being built, the tunnel was being built, and my role was to make sure they happened. And if you go back in the documents for operating trains through the tunnel, you'll see my signature on some of them. So I have a good understanding of what happens in the tunnel, what happens with international business. And in my latter years, I worked in Brussels as the head of European Affairs for Network Rail, and then as a Secretary General for the European Rail Infrastructure Manager. So I know the key players in Europe. I know how they think, how they're structured, and how much pressure you can apply to them through government, and how much you can apply subtly through other means. But trying to focus on some of the things that have been said tonight and move forward, it is true. I mean, when High Speed 1 was built, there are 4 train paths per hour to the tunnel for international services. And the plan was the first of those 4 trains stopped at Ashford and was overtaken by the second. And if need be, the third, then the fourth. So they all presented at the right time, the same time at the tunnel entrance. In terms of competition, it's worth thinking and remembering that actually the only private high-speed rail competition, as opposed to national operator versus national operator, exists in Italy and Spain. They are the only 2 countries. France has competition, but it's between Deutsche Bahn, SNCF, FS, SNCF, not private. Therefore, there are different drivers to what they do and don't do. And I mention that because SNCF, whilst not wanting to do a lot with Eurostar, is very, very keen to compete in the Spanish market and is going hell for leather with that. And whenever you put to them the fact that, hang on, you say you haven't any money to do things in the UK with Eurostar, why are you doing all this in Spain? They sort of shrug their shoulders and you don't get an answer. But if you go in the psyche of SNCF, London is just a branch of the TGV North. Just a branch, not important. And we have to get that message over that actually London is still very important to you. I was interested in thinking about new operators, and there are new private operators coming along in France, and one of whom is quite intriguing. It's called Kevin Speed. And he has latched on to TGV or Picardy, doesn't have any TGV services, a bit like Ashford for that matter. So he is going to start operating an open access service from Paris, calling it Haute Picardy and Lille. He's ordered his trains and they will be running in 2026. He's also running another couple of services in France, but that's quite separate. If anybody else wants to run any trains through the tunnel, unless they can find any Siemens E320 or old Eurostar services, you are talking about probably 2026, 2027, 2028 before you get the trains built, certified, and operating. So there's a gap going to come in there unless you can find some surplus Eurostar style trains or some of the really old Eurostar trains which tend to be cut up. The other new trains which are being built in now for coming into service in 2026, 27 is by another new company called Le Train, which will operate from Bordeaux into Paris as an open access operator in competition to SNCF. So those are things that are happening in France with open access. It was alluded to that there are other operators, Evelyn, perhaps Virgin, Euro, Renfe, who might want to come into the UK. And my guess is 2026, 2027. But the interesting bit, which has gone quiet at the moment, was actually Eurotunnel buying and leasing rolling stock to another operator. Now, this doesn't happen for long distance stock at the moment, but the EIB, in terms of the German model, invests in the regions to buy local trains, which they then lease back to whoever operates them. So that is perhaps the route that Eurotunnel is looking to go for a new high-speed rail operator. If they pick an operator who currently has a safety case, so Renfe would fit that, they would have the train supplied, it makes it much easier to get into the operation of trains. The other question I have, which is a slightly technical legal question, and I'm trying to get an answer to it. To the best of my knowledge, we have never closed an international station in the UK. If you want to close a domestic station or a piece of railway over which domestic passenger trains run, you have to go through a closure process. To the best of my knowledge, that hasn't happened for Ashford or Ebbsfleet, and neither has the spurs that were re-signalled got any passenger services on there. So there is a question mark as to whether there is a legal requirement to run trains over that bit of railway, carrying passengers and stopping at Ashford. And I haven't got an answer to that question as yet.
No,
I would.
no, it's well, they're very, very important, relevant questions, and I mean, just a quick response. Rail professionals that I've spoken to, other rail professionals, tell me, I mean, that was a huge missed opportunity when the documents were prepared when HS1 was leased and sold. They forgot about it, including that requirement, imposing that requirement on operators. So yeah, we will see. I think, yeah, I mean, I think they're very important questions to persevere with.
And one last point, which is
sorry, go on, Michael.
It's only a very quick last point. We talked about the new EAS coming in the end of the year, and we talked about Ashford having capacity. What I'm not sure is, my understanding is the PAF in France would probably play ball and get on with it. But I think we are suffering chronically from a shortage of UK border staff. Now, obviously, from listening to Damian, something's been done at Dover for both French and UK border staff. I don't detect there's anybody doing anything about thinking about recruiting UK border staff for Ebbsfleet and Ashford and Stratford if that comes to pass. So I think we need to think how we can get into lobbying that part and not just the rail part. Thank you.
That is, yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over back to Dickon and Bushra.
Well, thank you very much, both to you, Edith, and you, Micheal. That's absolutely fascinating and very, very useful information. We're going to move into a question and answer session now. So I'm sure there will be questions that will probably come your way, and certainly other questions.
Yeah, I can start off with the first question. So we've had a question from the audience. Why are Eurostar reps not here? So I guess the response to that is that, we do have our speakers, Andrew and Damian Green, who are working closely with central government, who are our representatives for Eurostar. And they came and attended one of the joint transportation meetings as well, which we attended, and presented our petition to them. So yeah, they are very, very aware of our campaign. And we will make the video available to them should they wish to get a feel for what this meeting was about. So yeah, we direct those conversations via Ashford Borough Council, KCC, and then Damian Green.
I think I've got a question I'd like to address to Micheal Robson, really about enablers. What, in terms of getting services back to Ashford, what do you think are the biggest sort of levers we might be able to pull at the moment, or what do you think are the sort of enablers of that actually happening? So it's a sort of reverse question to what are the major blocks, but what are the sort of key enablers do you think that could help that to happen?
I think raising the profile of Ashford with potential new operators is key to that. But what has Ashford, and not just Ashford, but the region, got to offer to a new operator? What sort of catchment area are they going to get into? They're probably not going to want your Ryanair customer only. They'll want some of them, but they will want some people who will pay a little bit more to travel. So thinking, what would a new operator see as their market for coming into Ashford? And I mean, my understanding is, for instance, that Canterbury University no longer has a link in Brussels. Now, that was a good source of business to Eurostar at that point. And there are other organisations who I think have stopped, probably, as JC was saying at the start, using Eurostar to do those things. So being able to quantify the people who would come back because Ashford was here will help a business case for whoever the operator comes, whether that's Eurostar or a new operator. And the other thing about Ashford is its strategic location in terms of onward transport links. I mean, going back in time when Eurostar stopped here, people from Brighton would come and use Ashford, and they came across the marsh. Now, that's, I would think, probably an outside operator wouldn't be thinking about that. They would assume people from Brighton would go to London, but they don't. Not everybody wants to go to London. And if you had an operator who was prepared to look at going to places where Eurostar have stopped going to, such as Euro Disney Direct, that is a big market. Now, Ashford was ideally built for that in terms of its space and the lounge, etc., is to be able to sell that to a new operator as a potential part of another overall plan in going to Paris. The downside for that operator, of course, is they would have to provide customs facilities in Marlborough and Euro Disney. But I think that is a doable thing. I don't think it's something that's possible to achieve. So I think the unblockers are selling Ashford the different segments of the market, and we've seen the report that's been done there. What would drive people to come here, and spreading the word amongst the new players, most of whom have representatives in Brussels, who are usually quite welcoming of people going and talking to them. I mean, the railways here, not not politics, the actual railways who are going to be doing it. I do know that railways have been talking about the safety and interoperability aspects of coming to the UK with the European Railway Agency. So things are going on. It's about keeping the profile up, I think, and selling the positive things that stopping at Ashford or Ebbsfleet can bring.
What do you, Micheal, Solomon Williams, who I think is now not with us in the meeting, but he mentioned Stratford, which is an interesting prospect. And I know when Stratford first came online, there was a lot of excitement in East London about the possibilities that would have for boosting the economy, and there was a lot of local politicians, I think, involved with it. What are your thoughts around Stratford as part of a mix enabling Ashford and Ebbsfleet to regain international services?
I think Stratford is a good thing to think about. From the best of my recollection, there's an awful lot of work needs to be done in Stratford to enable that to happen, because I don't believe the international facilities were actually put in at Ashford. It was just, at Stratford. It was just left as a big space, which is now filled with offices. I think the thing any operator coming into the UK has to think about is, what does it do with his trains when they get either to St Pancras or to Stratford? Where are they going? Because there's no stabling facilities in Stratford, there's no stabling facilities in St Pancras. There are stabling facilities in Ashford. So an operator running and using Stratford as their London terminus, which I suspect would be cheaper than going into St Pancras, could be a valuable thing. And if it was a Stratford Ebbsfleet Ashford service through the tunnel, great. I mean, I was interested in the statistics about the East Coast, because one of the operators on the East Coast is Lumo. And they are a new operator, and they run between Edinburgh and London, stopping at Newcastle, you would expect. But the only other two stops they have are Morpeth and Stevenage, which are not what you would consider huge places. But obviously they did their market research and decided there were good catchment areas there. And that's helped drive the overall number of passengers using train. And the same thing could happen from Stratford, Ebbsfleet and Ashford.
Interested in your perspective on the sort of the intermediate stations in France and how that might relate to Ashford and Ebbsfleet as well. So is there, I think you mentioned that to a certain extent the mindset is the sort of city to city, with certainly with sort of SNCF and some of the major players. But do you think that that's going to help the situation with Ashford and Ebbsfleet in terms of new people coming along, open access providers?
I think that could help. I think it will be very interesting to see how Kevin Speed's service gets on. And because there's no TGV serving Haute Picardy, if he actually develops a market from there, it would be analogous with Ashford or Ebbsfleet. So I think it would be very well worth watching to see what he does there. Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this is a question for Andrew Osborne. I don't know if you're still in the audience or Mark Welch.
Andrew's there.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, so this has come from the audience. What efforts have been made to include Southeast communities like Hastings and Eastbourne in getting wider support for a return of international rail services?
Thanks, Busher. As part of the campaign, we've been reaching out to local authorities in East Kent areas. I think there's been engagement with Damian around MPs in those areas as well, as part of the parliamentary work. So we have been reaching out to those areas. I'll probably be honest that actually the success has been with Kent authorities because the links are much closer and much better. But we have been reaching out to those. I don't know whether Mark, you wanted to come in on this as well, but certainly any interaction that we can have the organisations that will support the campaign. We'd be more than happy to follow those up. I think probably with the business survey and with others, you know, we've had some good interaction, especially around the petition as well, of course, as you could see from Philip's work in East Sussex areas, and so we'd be positive around sort of developing those further.
Okay, brilliant. And there's another common question, a common theme in questions we're seeing, which is around what are we doing in terms of interacting with any French authorities and also, I guess, reciprocal organisations.
It might be useful for Mark to come in here. I know that Micheal Robson mentioned David Pugh, who works for Kent County Council. Kent County Council involved in the Straits Committee, and so therefore there are links there already. David and I worked on the Ashford Spurs project to bring the signalling back to Ashford, and in fact, actually, I worked with David back in 2007 as well. And later on in relation to discussions with Eurostar. So, but Mark, I don't know whether you have any further.
I think Mark is there, but he's not got his video on.
No, sorry, I am here. Yeah, just on the first question, you know, the wider region, Kent County Council was a founding member of the subnational transport body, Transport for the South East, and we have this on their agenda. I think it's fair to say, you know, day to day on a authority by authority basis within the constituent members of Transport for the South East, and TFSE covers Kent Medway all the way around to Hampshire and the Berkshire area. It's for those constituent member authorities day to day, it's not on their agenda at all. That said, we're confident and we expect, as a founding member of Transport for the South East, that when we make our noise, as Andrew was talking about in his presentation, when we make our noise about the need for the return of these services, that Transport for the South East, representing all of those constituent authorities, will be part of that chorus. On cross-channel working, as Andrew mentioned, I mean, you know, again, international rail is just one of the interfaces that, you know, Kent County Council is involved in internationally because of things like the Port of Dover, Folkestone, small boats crossing, and so on. So there are frequent engagement by our members and senior officers with international colleagues, with the French Embassy, through the Straits Committee, I think Andrew mentioned, and this doesn't get lost in those conversations. And I think importantly, as Damian Green was emphasising, and as others have touched on, you know, an issue such as entry-exit system, it's relevant not just to this international rail question, but to all international crossing movements through all of the points within the county. And so whatever work is done on that in general is beneficial for the international rail question as well. So there's a lot that goes on. There's a lot that goes on, for sure.
Yeah, there is definitely a lot that happens behind the scenes, and we don't always hear of it. So it's really reassuring to know for the public and get an insight into, you know, the hard work that you and the team puts in. Thank you.
Can I ask you, Mark, as well? We've had a question from one of several questions from Joe Rossi in relation to whether you've made contact with shadow transport ministers and shadow teams from KCC. Obviously, that would be you know, something that people might expect at this stage.
I can't answer that. I mean, you know, bear in mind that we're a Conservative-run council, so you're dealing there with Labour politicians. I don't know, to be honest.
That's fair enough.
If it happens, it happens at the highest levels at the council. Certainly not something that I would be probably even aware of.
Absolutely fine. Another question from Joe Rossi: has there been any involvement with Oliver Morel on the board of French Chamber of GB? So that's sort of, again, that connection with continental, in this case, Chamber of Commerce.
No, no, it was helpful. I saw that in the chat earlier. It's helpful to have these sorts of hints and signposting. We've got the Kent Invicta Chamber of Commerce involved. They hadn't flagged anything like that. You know, I'd already met with Micheal from the campaign a number of weeks ago. And once we, as a partnership that Andrew mentioned, once we have a sort of clarity on precisely what we will do and when we will do it, we'll engage with Micheal on what our sort of plan is and how the campaign can be part of that, if they're willing to be part of it, and what they can do to help us with it. But no, there's a helpful signposting there, something that we'll follow up as a lead.
Okay. Thanks for that. And last question really around capacity at St Pancras. We've had a comment within the questions about you know, very unhappy with the situation at St Pancras. Obviously, it's become very crowded, and with the European exit system coming in full force October, things are obviously could get rather more difficult there. I wondered whether you'd had any conversations with anybody around capacity issues at St Pancras in terms of their influence on you know, we've got unused capacity at Ashford and Ebbsfleet, or anything that's sort of brought that capacity issue up at all.
Well, to be brutally frank about Eurostar, clearly, you know, given situations that they've had, such as, you know, the Thames Tunnel flooding over the Christmas New Year period, and the sort of carnage it caused at the terminus then, the issues they were having when wet stamping of passports returned, and the capping on their capacity, and they didn't take any action through that. It doesn't seem to be a big enough issue for Eurostar to be concerned. And I think, again, to an extent, it partly comes back to the problem that they have had a monopoly, or a pseudo monopoly, because of the high barriers to entry that exist for other operators to get onto the line. You know, and they have the advantage of effectively having been established by the French and British state around, you know, to coincide with the opening of the Channel Tunnel. So they come from a sort of a privileged position back from, you know, day one of all of this. I think it's been known for a while, just generally, that not just the international terminus at St Pancras, but all of the capacity around the High Speed 1 arrival points, so the domestic railway and the international, is squeezed and lacking in capacity. The issue, of course, is that there isn't a lot of room to do anything. And I think, I can't remember who it was, I think it was Damian who referred to the fact that they'll probably end up cannibalizing some of the retail units, which would be understandable because there's probably a lot more money for High Speed 1, the owners, to make out of having more trains running along the track than there is from the revenue from some of the retail units, as lucrative as those might be at St Pancras. The other thing that Andrew has seen, and numerous others have seen around this subject, is recently there was I think publication of an invitation to tender for seeking architectural services to undertake work to develop a more capacious international terminal at St Pancras. So High Speed 1 are definitely taking action. It's not necessarily 100% clear what primarily has driven that now. If it was entry exit system, you'd think, well, they've known about that for a while, so why wasn't it commissioned, you know, maybe last year or the year before? Because, you know, from what we've seen of the tender, it looks like it is, you know, seeking initial design services. There's a long way to go from architects drawing up plans and options, how to add capacity at the terminus, through to actually delivering them. So I was just gonna finish. Part of my instinct is that it may actually be possibly also driven by the attention and interest of potential new competitors. and therefore the need to accommodate, as we were talking earlier, about them bringing in their own, arrival check-in desks, points and so on around that. So either way, there's lots going on that we need to keep an eye on, because it's obviously going to affect the nature of the conversation that we're trying to have on bringing back Ashford and Ebbsfleet.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. That's very, very useful information. Actually, it's interesting. I think Andrew wanted to come back in, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Yes, if I just may, a few more points. I think the critical point around the issue of capacity at St Pancras, and the question that everyone's asked and I've asked, which is, well, if you've got capacity issues at St Pancras, why don't you open up Ebbsfleet and Ashford? Because ultimately then you can release some of that capacity issue and have people coming through. I think as we know, the two sort of main challenges we've had from Eurostar in terms of what they presented, one is on the commercial case and the ability and their debt position. The second one is around the entry and exit system and the additional border checks that they've got. What we know from discussions with them is that the PAF officers, the French border force people that used to work at Ebbsfleet and Ashford haven't gone away. They've gone up to St Pancras to deal with the additional checks and activities that there are there. So we know that in opening up Ashford and Ebbsfleet, in terms of the ES new border and additional border checks, there'll be a requirement for additional booths and other activity and infrastructure that will be at a cost. The other thing is that they are trying to maintain the border resource in terms of border officers within St Pancras, and they need it there. They quite rightly so say that actually each of those border force operators at St Pancras will deal with a lot more people within an hour than they do at Ashford and Ebbsfleet. So therefore, with a scant resource, they will keep them there. So the arguments that I made, Dickon, as you referred to earlier on when we went up to Parliament for the inquiry, was that, and in discussions that Mark and I have had with HS1, because we meet with them relatively regularly as well, is to call for additional support to put the infrastructure in for Ashford and Ebbsfleet to unlock the issue about infrastructure, but also to call for additional PAF officer support, border force officials, because that's what will be required in order to actually then release Ashford and Ebbsfleet. Challenge why they're not doing that at the moment is because they need that resource in London, and they don't have additional resource then to put to Ashford and Ebbsfleet. And I think that's probably quite an important element. So what Eurostar have said to us is until the EES system is resolved and they are confident with where they're at and that they actually have the resource to be able to put out to Ashford and Ebbsfleet, then that is a barrier to return of services.
Thank you very much for that. Well, thank you for your contribution, both you and Mark. I think we're going to wrap up now.
We should, yeah. So, well, we'd like to thank everyone who has attended this and to all the speakers for committing their time to making this event happen. And particularly, I guess, to Andrew Osborne and Mark Welch and the team as well, because we know behind the scenes you've been supporting our campaign for quite a few months now to help, give momentum. And it was great to hear from Edith as well. It's been very inspiring not to lose faith and to continue that momentum, especially as times are going to get harder and it takes longer. So I guess that's an important message from her. That I took from that conversation. And finally, a huge thank you to our volunteers who've been working behind the scenes to help put this event together. So it's Alex, Stephanie, Philip, Sarah, Dickon, Pablo, and Lauren.
And we'd also like to say that please do stay connected with us. Sign up for our social media and keep an eye on our website. And also thanks very much to the donors as well. We really appreciate your support. It does make a difference. We do have some ongoing costs to maintain what we're doing at the moment. So if there's anybody that's actually watching this that would like to donate that hasn't done already, there is a link on our website to allow you to support our activities. And by no means will this be the last thing we're doing. There'll be many more things that we will do. Will be more events like this. We'll bring you some really good participants. But thank you very much for your attendance, and yeah, thank you. Take care.
Yeah, have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much.
All right, see you.